All right, very cool. We're rolling up. Welcome to the Jungle Brothers podcast. It's me, Joey Wellington. We've got Tira Ward in the house.
Hi.
And we've got a good friend of ours, Bridget Mottram. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining us. This is you haven't been on a podcast before, is that right?
I have not. It's very exciting.
Are you nervous?
Like a little bit, just because I talk very fast.
You do.
So you're going to need to slow me down a little bit.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to get into it and you're here to talk. So this is the perfect platform for you to take that skill
first
set.
Podcast. Mm-hmm. Wow, you seem very natural behind the speaker already.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I do talk a lot, so it might just be a natural extension.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah, you might have found a new place to be. I've known Bridget for, I don't know, a few years now. We met through training. You're a jiu-jitsu player.
Yeah.
We met through, you came and did some training here at Jungle Brothers. You jumped in on my Bulletproof for BJJ program for a while. That was super cool. And then we did a retreat together.
Yeah.
Came on my retreat in Bali, which was super cool.
When we could travel.
Oh, you did the retreat?
Did the retreat.
Oh,
it was
nice.
amazing.
Yeah, it was fucking cool, that
It's
one.
just like 6 days of happiness.
Yeah.
And
Was that
Sweat.
Derek? No, Derek. Derek was at the one before. That was, but all
Josh.
Yeah. Josh,
help.
Josh Cordoba, handsome
oh,
man.
love him. Saw him up at Byron recently.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, caught up with him. It was great.
I think they got rid of their cafe. I think.
I think they did too. They had
Yeah,
it when
right.
we were there, but
Okay.
I think they've really recently sold up.
Yeah, right.
Is he taking yoga up there or classes
yeah,
or
he
something?
was. I think they might have actually started, maybe invested in or bought a yoga studio or something like that. I don't know. They fucking got new business every day, those
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, he's teaching. Maybe you should get in touch.
I'll get in touch, yeah.
On the Mullumbimby transition.
Oh, yeah.
You know, T's going to Mullumbimby to open a Jungle Brothers gym.
I am. Yeah. If everything works out the way.
Yeah, this is the plan.
Expanding.
Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, the tentacles are starting to
2.0.
There
Yeah.
will be a takeover.
Yeah.
It's coming.
So exciting.
Yeah, it is actually.
Now, Bridge, you are I know you as a super happy-go-lucky, hyper-positive, loud, boisterous, bouncing around the room, kind of hugging everyone type of individual.
Yeah. COVID's loved me.
Yeah, you weren't built for COVID.
Nah.
I remember when we got together for a PT session and we had our distance.
Height of COVID.
It was the height of COVID and it was like, yeah, we can do a PT, but we can't be, we've got to keep the distance and we're really respectful of it. And then Tree turned up to the park, who Bridget had been on the retreat with, and she was like, Tree! And she started the sprint towards him, like to launch herself. And I was like, Bridget, no. And she was like, oh. And she reeled it in. So funny. So I remember when you saw Camilo here at the gym, it was like a guard pull from the other side of the room. You jumped like 5 meters and landed around him like a teddy bear.
Yeah.
To embrace and say hi.
Choke him out.
Yeah, it was fun.
It's my natural hello.
But we've got you in today because you're going to talk to us about domestic violence.
I am.
Which is, kind of very much offset of what I know of your personality, because I'm guessing
Not so many laughs.
not a boisterous topic.
No. But yeah, I work for the Sydney Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service. I am a safety action meeting coordinator. And we are auspiced by Southwest Sydney Legal Centre, which is an incredible legal centre who do heaps of DV services and work and advocacy and resources and all that sort of thing. Got great expertise, so sort of surrounded by some really amazing experts in the field.
And that's your full-time gig.
That is my full-time job.
What does a day at work look like?
So it's a little bit varied every day. The main crux of our work is that we receive automatic referrals from police as soon as there's been DV contact. So it's called Safer Pathways Program. It's a statewide program where the police systems speak to our systems. And as soon as they put an event on, a police event on of a DV nature, it comes through, the info comes through to us and we call the female victims. Male victims go to another service. So we call them sort of like the day after or the Monday after the incident's happened. We say, hey, we know something's happened. There may be an AVO or criminal charges. There may not be. How are you doing? What do you need? Do you need legal advice? Do you need housing? Do you need counselling? Do you need financial assistance? Like, what do you need? And then we sort of walk them through any processes that they may need and send out referrals to where they go. So that's a huge crux of our work. I do the matters that come through as serious threat. So they're graded either as threat or serious threat. And when police send them through a serious threat, they're the ones I call, and they're the ones that we're really concerned about. And then every second Tuesday, we do a safety action meeting, which is pretty much the crux of my job, which is where in the sector we have police, fax child protection, fax housing, or DCJ I should say, housing, corrections.
What's that?
Oh, sorry, family and community services. However, they're now called Department of Communities and Justice.
Okay.
They change their name every few years. It gets very confusing.
New acronyms.
Yeah.
And we spoke about this. You've got a lot of tech talk.
Yes.
Which, I mean, we'll pull you up on it. So for the
Please.
listeners out there, we'll be like getting definitions. So just sweat it.
A whole lot of different health workers, like the hospitals, mental health, some non-government organisations. And we all sort of sit together at one table and talk about these really concerning matters. And a lot can sort of happen from the safety action meetings, but it's pretty much just making sure that the whole sector is working together to keep women and children safe of these matters that we're really worried about.
Okay.
And then, yeah, it's sort of just like a lot of, we're the middleman for a lot of different places. Our job is largely like connecting different sectors. So traditionally, health hasn't spoken with police, hasn't spoken with the criminal justice system. They've all sort of acted in silos.
Yep.
And women have had to go and keep retelling their story everywhere they go.
Yep.
So the idea of us is that they tell us their story and then we send them to the places that they're telling us they need to go. So we're sort of trying to give them as much autonomy and say in what happens as we can. And then they're not having to go find these services themselves and they're not having to retell their story so much.
Right. So the people that they're going to see have been brought up to speed. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a case that they're made aware of.
Yeah. And we'll often send referrals through where we're just like, yep, this is her name and number. This is a bit about her story. She's waiting for your phone call. And then she gets another phone call from a counsellor and they're just like, hey, like Bridget's referred you to us. And then she goes, oh yeah, I spoke to Bridget and she said that she was going to do that. So
Right.
it doesn't scare them. They're familiar with who's about to call them. And they're just like, yeah, like we're happy to book you in for a counselling session. And then that process starts. Whereas that woman's just got so much to deal with that counselling's the last thing on her mind when it's really the first thing she needs.
Right.
Is a bit of help to settle her mind.
Yep.
And that retelling of the story is also a reliving this horrible scenario
Yeah.
over and over again, which is what you don't want to do. I'm guessing
Absolutely.
like as an individual, you'd think, okay, I don't want to keep reliving that.
Yeah, technical term is re-traumatisation.
Re-traumatization.
Yeah,
It's a real thing.
it is very much a real thing
Yeah.
and it is very, very damaging.
Yeah,
So
right.
wow, okay. That makes a lot of sense then.
Yeah. So we have women sort of say to us quite frequently, like it was really great to not have to tell the counsellor what was going on. Like we always get consent to share information, but a lot of the time you sort of think, oh God, I'm telling these really intimate details about this woman to a counsellor, when really she's just like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't have to tell her that because I just didn't want to say it again.
Yeah.
So it is really helpful to be able to share that information, obviously with the woman's consent, and to be able to refer them. One of the biggest things that we refer to is family law advice, because so often kids are involved. And it is so terrifying. The family law court is a terrifying process. And
Because of the nature of kids and kids getting taken away from you and that kind of thing.
The
Yeah.
professionals involved in the process.
it's sort of the everything. Like, we have the lawyers are very difficult. Then lawyers in general aren't patient people, but the legal process is a very confusing one. And so women need a lot of guidance through that. And it's a very scary process because you don't know what's happening and what all this massive legal jargon means. But, then it's also like, how much is this lawyer going to cost me? And, they charge hundreds per hour and, what is this whole process going to look like? How long is it going to take? The family law court itself is a terrifying, intimidating building. Just the whole situation, the idea that, you're talking about some really abusive men and you're just like, his mental health is declining. I don't really want him having the kids without supervision. we end up with situations like Hannah Clark, and these are the things that are just constantly... Hannah Clark. I'm going to say Gold Coast. I should know this off by heart.
Yeah.
Gold Coast murder, where she and the kids were burnt alive in the car with him.
Yeah.
These are the horror stories that we actively think of daily, that we actively try to avoid.
Right.
And then there was one whose names I cannot remember. It's terrible of me. It was out in Pennant Hills where the father went and shot the 2 kids. And then, skipped down the driveway and off he went. And these are, they're not overly common things. Like, when you look at how many people go through the family court, but they're common enough to terrify women.
Yep.
They're just like, he's got nothing left to lose. Is he going to kill my children?
Like those rare incidences have an effect on women as a whole.
Massively. And then, of course, there's Rosie Batty's son, who was killed by her partner.
Yeah.
She thought she was doing the right thing. She didn't want to be seen as that vindictive bitch by the family court. She let him see his son, and then in broad daylight, in the middle of the park, he killed him with a cricket bat.
That was horrific.
Fucking
horrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrible, right? But then you go to family court, and when women have withheld children, the lawyers are just like, you're just this vindictive bitch. You just don't want him having his kids. Why are you so horrible?
That's the angle they play.
That's the angle they play. And this is what women are trying to avoid when they allow visitation with these men. And then when they kill the children, everyone's just like, well, why did you let him have them?
Yeah.
Like, they're just stuck in this horrific bind. And then, of course, there's the way that we talk about these men in the media, which is, he was a good dad. And he's like, bro, he just killed his kids.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's not a good dad.
Yeah, apparently she was provoking him.
Yeah, right?
I think the Telegraph likes that angle.
So when
they love that angle.
When we're talking, because it's obviously this men and woman thing. It is a thing. Like a lot of people talk. Well, females can be abusive as well in relationships, but let's talk statistics because we need to lay it down right here.
Absolutely,
there's a huge shift of difference between the two. So have you got statistics on?
I do. We do love some stats in DV. So it is a very gendered thing. So just some really sort of simple stats. 1 in 6 women and 1 in 16 men have experienced physical or sexual violence from a current or previous partner since the time they were 15. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have experienced emotional abuse, and 1 in 5 women and 1 in 20 men have been sexually assaulted by a current or previous partner. And then we have 1 woman killed every 9 days by a partner and 1 man killed every 29 days by a partner.
In Australia?
In Australia.
Yep.
So these are all Australian stats. These are all ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics stats. But what is really important to keep in mind is that men are the primary perpetrators of violence, with 94% of both male and female victims reporting a male perpetrator.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that women are never violent, women don't do these things, but they statistically do not do them at even close to the levels that men do. And there's also...
was that 94% of cases is a male perpetrator?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So...
Huge.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah.
So men are absolutely victims. They're more victimised than women of like pub assaults and all of this sort of thing. If we just look at assaults in general, men are probably more victimised, but it's almost always a male perpetrator. Like, you go to a pub, you have a pub brawl, it's between 2 men.
Yeah.
Right? And then we also have what types of assaults are done by men and women. So the type of violence perpetrated is really different. So choking, damaging property, strikes resulting in split lips, fractured teeth, bones, blackouts, and threatening to hit a partner are largely committed by men and rarely by women, whereas cutting, scratching the face are more committed by women. But they're like wildly different things, right?
Yeah.
Like a scratch on your face compared to a broken bone.
Yeah.
But when we
Smashed
sort of
teeth.
look...
One's potentially going to kill you or do permanent damage, and the other's not.
Absolutely. But when you have, a deep laceration or, a broken bone that heals or whatever, it's the same offence, criminal offence, as a scratch to the face. So if we just sort of go into assault offences for a second, you've got 3 main categories. You've got common assault, which is where you are assaulted but you're not harmed. So like if I push you, it's a common assault. If I'm even just like up in your personal space, that can be a common assault.
Right.
If you're scratched and it leaves a mark, anything that kind of leaves a mark is ABH, so assault occasioning actual bodily harm. And then anything that generally the threshold is permanent damage. So anything that leaves permanent damage is GBH, so grievous bodily harm.
Right.
So ABH is this massive bit in between that encompasses anything from a scratch that leaves a mark to any assault that you can heal from that doesn't leave permanent damage.
Which could be a broken bone.
That's
Which
insane.
could be a broken bone.
Yeah,
It's
right.
very strange.
Fractured skull, something like that. Fractured skull?
Fractured skull's probably going to leave
Grievous
damage.
bodily harm,
Yeah, it'd probably
right.
end up being GBH. But then sometimes police will charge with ABH because the threshold is lower and they're more likely to get a conviction than GBH where he's more likely to get off. Like you're better to get something, right?
Yeah.
So even when we look at stats of that particular offence, they're still skewed
Yeah.
because you're looking at wildly, wildly different health burdens.
This hugely broad category.
Massively broad. And when we look at the health burden for women, it is the disease burden of DV is the risk. There is no other risk factor that is bigger for women between 18 and 44, including smoking, high cholesterol and drug use together have less of a health burden for women 18 to 44 than DV.
Wow.
Gosh, that's scary.
That's
It's scary for me
combined.
because I have a daughter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And a sister and mum and all these women in my life. And to think that that the biggest threat to their health is another male.
Yeah.
It scares me, but it also angers me a lot. It angers me because I'm a male, and it angers me that there's men out there that represent me, my sex,
Yeah.
that are a threat to people that are closest to me. Where are they most at risk? Is it in the
home.
pub? At home.
home.
Okay, that kind of tops it. I mean, that's a horrible scenario to think that your own home is the least safest place for you as a woman between that age gap.
Yeah, and it's
And here in Australia, we're not talking like developing country or country with very strict religious connections or anything like that. This is
Our houses, our streets.
Yes.
yeah, it's like next door.
Just to define, when you say the health burden, is that what the government spends, like has to spend on that sector of
Like
healthcare?
theoretically, obviously we don't see that happen in actuality.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the DV sector would be absolutely flooded with funding, which we are not.
Yeah.
It's more of a statistical term in terms of like this is where we are seeing a burden of health. Like this is where we're seeing injuries.
Right.
And, people going to hospital, people dying, like
Yeah.
these are the causes. And when we put all those causes together and create statistics, that's the health burden.
Fucking hell.
So it's almost like it's its own little pandemic, really.
Absolutely.
So why isn't it talked about more? I mean, these stats are something that we should all really be talking about. What's happening in this space?
It is so complex, and it's because it does happen in the home. And these are a lot of the matters that we see in court, his word against hers. And there's a lot of ways that you can get different injuries, and there's a lot of different versions of that particular event that you could sort of manufacture. And so when you have like just one version against the other, and she's saying he hit me, and he's saying like she was drunk and she fell over and she thought it was me, it wasn't, she hit her face, she was just so blackout drunk. And we're talking about DV victims, they're generally not perfect little women. They're quite often have coping mechanisms like alcohol, but know when they've been socked in the face. How does a magistrate find where the truth is? And then again, we're looking at a woman who's traumatized. She does not present well in court compared to a man who's very in control of his life, very in control of her, and presents very well in court. So it is so difficult for a criminal justice system when there is no other proof to find what happened. And it's the fact that it is ongoing, it's really insidious, and it's a built effect. So when you're in a pub, you've got CCTV footage, everyone's drunk, you get socked in the face, you don't ever think, oh, that was my fault, right? If some bloke comes up to you and hits you in the face, you're never going to think, oh, like that was probably my fault, hey. We hear that daily.
From the women.
Yeah. Because it's called coercive control. And it's sort of all of these different behaviours that are built up often over years before anybody gets hit, where it's sort of like a pattern of minimising.
See what it made me do.
Yeah, Jess Hill's book.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's exactly what it is. See what you made me do.
Such
and
a
they believe
classic
that
line, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, it's incredibly difficult, and it's not. We had the one punch stuff, right? 3 deaths in a year, we shut down.
Shut down the whole of Sydney.
Shut down, and it worked partially because we removed people, which helps. But
We made them stay home. Problematic in itself,
right?
Yeah.
And that actually did see an increase in DV, by the way.
Wow.
Oh, really?
That was was that the original? Was that the lockout thing?
Yeah,
When it was
lockout
like 10
laws.
p.m. it's closed. Yeah. City's done, kind of thing. Yep.
Yeah, but it's really easy,
Was that
right?
in response to the one punch? I fucking can't.
Yep.
Going back.
That was in response to the one punch
Right.
laws, and it was 3 murders in a year, which statistically wasn't any higher than the last 12 years. So it wasn't.
Right, it
It
wasn't
wasn't
abnormal.
endemic. No. It's just that it was in the media, and it was something that was really easy to solve. Because when you remove people and alcohol, even if you just remove alcohol, but if you remove people and alcohol, you've solved the problem.
Yeah.
And it is a really easily solvable problem.
Yeah.
DV's not. It's really difficult and complex. And even those within the sector and advocates are trying sort of different things all the time to make things work. And it is just really, really difficult.
So we had the lockdowns. We also had COVID. What kind? And you're on the end of these calls, so I'm guessing you have a fair idea of the trends that are happening in this space. What kind of effect did COVID have on domestic violence?
Yeah, massive. So we've sort of got 2 separate sets of stats, both of which theoretically are correct. So police generally saw stable or even lower rates of domestic violence reported, but a lot of frontline services saw massive, massive increases. And that is almost purely because women weren't able to report.
Ah, okay.
Or were
'Cause they're
Too
stuck in the
scared
house.
because they're stuck at home. They can't go. They can't leave.
Fuck.
So sometimes they can't even make a phone call without him knowing, right? Like, how big's your apartment kind of thing. You can hear everything happening in it. But then the other thing is that when women take any action or leave or report, everything else is sorted. They have the house sorted, the kids sorted, the school, the work, everything. During COVID, none of that was sorted. We had people losing their jobs left, right and centre. We had people losing their homes. Kids are at home screaming the house down, doing homeschooling, like all of those pressures.
Extra pressure.
Yeah. So A, that led to an increase in DV, but B, it also meant that women, it was just silly to report for a lot of them, because they're just like, I'm just going to create tension.
Yeah. There's other shit I have to take care of.
Yeah. And when they've been living in this, they actually know, and this is something that I don't know that they get enough credit for, they know their partner better than anybody. And they know how to keep themselves safe a lot of the time. So particularly in my role, it's not my job to tell her what she should be doing.
Yeah.
Because I can give suggestions. I can say, look, these services are out there. Here's some info, and I can refer you to them if you want me to. But you still know him best, and you still know your situation best. And, you have to make these decisions for yourself because you know how that's going to pan out. And most of the time when I sort of talk to women, they're just like, oh, he's going to do this. And it's exactly what they do because they know them so well. So a lot of the time they're just like, I know he'll just blow up. These are the things that I know I've got to do to appease him. And so that's what I've just got to wait out the lockdown. I just got to wait out COVID. So we saw some really big increases with like counselling services, DV counselling services, and they had massive demand because women were just like, I just need you to help me get through and then I'll be good. But just help me get through, but I don't want to report.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's sort of different stats, but it generally looks like there was an increase in at least demand for support services. And then of course we had, you know, the more victimised populations and vulnerable populations like women on temporary spousal visas, which that became a massive problem. Yeah, so Red Cross, I'm pretty sure, were amazing. They got some really great funding and they did a program which is still ongoing for women on temporary spousal visas. But again, it's a one-off payment.
That's when you're from overseas, you're living here, and your visa is underneath your partner's, more or less.
Yeah, pretty much. Like a lot of the women that we deal with, he's an Australian citizen. She's here on a temporary spousal visa. So you're brought to Australia. There's a lot of different types of temporary spousal visas. It's very, very complicated. Not my area of expertise, but we have some great legal services that we refer to. But the main gist of it is that they're here sort of connected to his citizenship.
Yeah.
And if they break up, she gets sent back home.
Yeah.
So often that's used as another form of abuse. So sort of like, I'll cancel your visa.
Yeah.
Which they technically can't do, but they can withdraw support for it. But that's a really powerful thing.
That's like ownership in a sense,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
And then they are not entitled to nearly anything under the government. Centrelink, you know, different refuges can't take them because they don't have funding for it.
Wow.
They are, left out pretty high and dry.
So we've got this increase that happened over COVID. You're on the front line with this. What are you're talking about the nature of domestic violence. How does it all come about, and what does it look like?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things that coincide together. The first one is the cycle of violence, which is sort of how DV looks in the way that it's not all bad all the time. So, you know, we start with this build-up phase where, you know, there's tensions coming and, you know, we know something's kind of building. And then we've got the standover phase, which is a really dangerous phase where, like, you're waiting for him to explode at any point in time. And then we have the explosion, which is, you know, where the peak of the violence in the relationship happens. And then we have the remorse and pursuit phases. So I'm really, really sorry. It'll never happen again. Chocolates and flowers. I love you. Please come back to me. You know, you're the only one who can fix me. You're the only one who can help me. And we have the honeymoon phase. So that's where the relationship is really good. And we hear a lot from women, I know that this is happening, but when it's good, it's great. It's amazing. He's the best man I've ever known. And that's that honeymoon phase.
That sense of, the bar is so low and the sense of relief is so high. I'm guessing anything other than getting abused is going to feel good.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
feel that contrast too, though, don't we?
It's contrast.
To go from something so horrible to something so beautiful.
Yeah.
It really makes you want to crave the beautiful thing.
Yeah, and you're just like, this is so amazing. You know, it's like when you do anything, like when you're under a huge amount of stress and it's relieved, you feel so euphoric. And most people are just sort of going about their day and there's nothing different about it, but you feel amazing. It's the same kind of thing. And then we start that cycle again and we start the build up. And it's a really easy cycle to get stuck in. And a lot of the reasons that we get stuck in it is because it's not all physical. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception about DV is that it's physical. And, you know, we hear a lot, well, if he hits you, you just leave. Like as soon as he hits you. But quite often the first hit doesn't come until years into the abuse.
Right.
But there's still been abuse for those years.
Yeah.
In the form of
numerous different types of things. So the main model used to explain this is called the Duluth model or the power and control wheel. And it's a wheel that has power and control in the middle. And the reason for that is because everything that an abuser does is to create or maintain power and control. And then around the spokes of the wheel that we have is the use of intimidation, use of emotional abuse, isolation, minimising, denying and blaming, use of children, use of male privilege, use of economic abuse and coercion and threats.
The economic abuse is an interesting one because I didn't actually recognise it until I saw a big fold out in the Sydney Morning Herald during COVID. It was like a centre page and it was something to do, I can't remember the exact words, but it was saying if you don't control any income in your family, there's a chance you're being financially abused. And I was like, whoa, that was a really hard hitting ad. And I thought it was amazing because I didn't even think about that as a tool. And now when I think about it, it's actually a hugely powerful tool to have over someone.
So effective. And it can be really difficult to identify because a lot of relationships, there's one person who's really shit with money.
Yeah.
And if you give them money, they will go and spend it on, God knows what. So the other party's just like, I would like us not to go bankrupt, dear.
Yeah.
And has control of all the money. But the difference comes when you don't have access to any money, when your wage is going into his account, when you have to ask and beg for any money to do anything.
Feed the kids. It's also a good way to track somebody because you can see where they've been and what we're doing in this shop when you're reading the bank account.
The transactions.
Transaction details and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's sort of, technology generally, but particularly that sort of thing has added another element of abuse to this whole thing. And it means that is sort of the biggest thing that we see why women can't leave. They just don't have access to money. They don't have any funds. And, that age-old sort of story of her hiding away little bits of money here and there is really quite accurate.
Plan for her escape in a way.
Yeah, because it's sort of the only way that she can get those funds up because she doesn't have access to any other money. And, all of these things work in conjunction together. So when you have economic abuse and the use of children, you're just like, I have no money and, he's going to take my kids away. And then you've got, minimising, denying and blaming. So, oh, it wasn't that bad, just get over it. Or,
You're blowing this up.
Yeah, if you weren't such a naggy bitch, I wouldn't have to hit you. We hear this sort of thing quite frequently. And then when you hear that, over time, over and over again, you really start to believe it. Yeah. It's it's the same way that people are, told to raise their kids through positive reinforcement rather than constant beratement. It's the exact same theory.
What about, let's say, because obviously these guys are out there, and I guess it's always good to look for preventatives. Are there signs that I could teach my daughter to look for in an individual that could get them a bit more of an early warning signal where they can go, okay, he's ticking some boxes here.
Yeah.
Red flag, I'm getting out before it gets to the stage where they're trapped in this cycle. Is there any resource, or there's something that you could put forward?
An amazing resource that was actually built by Legal Aid is called Charmed and Dangerous. And if you Google it, it's the first thing to come up.
Cool name.
Great name, because it's exactly what they are. They're so freaking charming.
Yeah.
And it has sort of all of these psychoeducation stuff about DV in there. But that's sort of the other thing, is it is really difficult to pick these warning signs. Some of them are quite obvious. If he wants to know, it can often start very early in the relationship. If he wants to know where you are all the time and who you're talking to, that's a little bit of a concern. Why is he wanting to control your actions so much? One of the biggest issues is that Hollywood really likes to romanticize a lot of the red flags that we see. So, instead of saying he's a little bit controlling, particularly for this early on, it's like, oh, he's
in love with you.
Really into you. He's fallen head over heels, love at first sight. He hasn't.
Wants to control you.
He wants to control, yeah.
On that, and say with, because with the stats, it's like, okay, there's this is happening on a huge scale. So these people are out there, but I'm thinking like, it's not, I can only imagine that with numbers that big, it's not like they're different people, different men to T and I. It's just men. And it's I'm guessing for a lot of the men who would be perpetrators, there are characteristics like personality traits and whatever. But I'm guessing also that there's plenty of seemingly good people through the pressures of life and adulthood and that kind of thing get turned into this. Like the cracks are exposed and then they become that kind of... Can you talk on that?
Yeah, so Michael Johnson actually separates those two types of people into it's intimate terrorism and situational couple violence. So intimate terrorism and intimate terrorists are these kinds of men that we're talking about, where they actively attempt to build and maintain power and control. And then we have situational couple violence, where we have men that could probably really benefit from a men's behaviour change program, aggression, alcohol and drug, mental health sort of assistance, where we have a build-up of financial stress, work pressure, kids pressure, whatever. They then, they want someone to blame. They don't know how to deal with their emotions. They don't know how to emotionally regulate. They turn to alcohol. They turn to drugs. It's suddenly all her fault because she just seems like a really great person to blame. So, like, there's sort of two very different types of violent offenders. That's not to say that situational couple violence isn't as dangerous, because women have been killed through situational couple violence, right? It can be just as dangerous, but it's not quite so insidious. And that's where services like men's behavioural change programs, alcohol and drug programs, mental health assistance, encouraging him to go and seek professional help to deal with the way that he addresses conflict, how he deals with his aggression and his emotional regulation, can be that turning point. It's, woe for me to say that once there's been any kind of violence in a relationship, it can't work, because we know many women who have gone back to their abuser, for use of a better word, and they've made it work. He's gotten help. They've been able to continuously work at what this looks like without her being blamed, and that's sort of like a really important point to make clear, is that it's never her fault, but she can support him through his recovery and they can have a violence-free relationship. It is possible. It is less possible when we're talking about intimate terrorists, because they're usually narcissists. Kind
of born like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And can those people be rehabilitated, or is it, I don't know if that's the right word, but...
Yeah. Look, personally, I don't have a huge amount of faith in that. When you're looking at someone whose core values are to control someone else, you're going to struggle to penetrate those core values.
Yeah.
When you have someone who craves that power, it's sort of something that I don't know how you shift that. Men's behavioural change programs is not terribly my area of expertise. I sort of deal with the other side. I know they are desperately trying, but I also know that it can take 2 or 3 shots of men participating in these programs before they really are able to start changing their behaviours. But when we're looking at intimate terrorists, I'm very sceptical.
Yeah, right.
So we're talking about these preventatives with the women, like how to look for these telltale signs, but we also need to focus on the perpetrators. And these statistics are high, but I'm guessing that we've got the same male reoffending over and over. It's not like 1 in every 3 males is beating up women. But how do we? Because there's also this cycle you're talking about. So a lot of these males, would you say, could have been brought up in a household with a similar kind of environment, with dads instilled the core values of treating his mother like crap, and then you grow up and you think, okay, well, that's just how it's kind of done.
Yeah.
How do we intervene with that? Like, how do we get to these kids before they become these perpetrators?
School education. Unfortunately, that's a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations that we then sort of have to go through. And, you're at school and then you go home to the same thing. It's sort of hard to then say that the school education's right. But we certainly in schools need more focused, more upfront education about what healthy relationships look like. Like, you get the sex ed with, this is how sex works, don't get pregnant kind of thing. But we do not do enough on what does a healthy relationship look like. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And potentially educating parents as well to know what to look for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, social media and technology's made that really hard because, kids can sit in their room for hours on end on their phone and you've got no idea what they're doing.
Sitting on Reddit and toxic crap like that.
Yeah. But it's, it's sort of like this really difficult, primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention kind of model where we've got to get in early to make sure that we try and at least decrease these numbers that we're seeing over time. But yeah, and, encouraging parents to know the signs to look for, I think the biggest sign is he constantly there? Is he constantly wanting to know where she is? When they get a little bit older, it's not like your job as a parent stops at 18. If your daughter's getting in a new relationship, it's going really fast, really quick, and then all of a sudden he's just like, oh, give up your place, just move into mine, and it's been like 3 months. These are sort of these really fast-moving relationships, this love bombing. Love bombing. So it's sort of just like this massive amount of love that you're bombed with. Yep. And it feels amazing. There's so many endorphins. It's so euphoric. And it's a really great tactic, particularly when abusers identify girls who have been neglected or abused as children. And we see that a lot with our clients is they're just like, this started when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's normal for me. And, they're very good, abusers are very good at identifying that vulnerability.
Abusers, when you're talking about them in that sort of realm, are they doing this, is this a conscious thing that they're doing, that they're going out looking for victims? Or is it just a case of their behaviours are sort of like in that sort of cycle?
It's a little bit difficult for me to say because I don't have anything to do with them generally. For us, it definitely feels like it's a purposeful thing. But then at the same time, you look at their history and like T said, they've got, child abuse behind them. So it feels very purposeful and I feel like they at least know damn well that they're controlling someone.
At least intuitively.
Whether it's all conscious or not.
Yeah.
And that's where we end up seeing these serial abusers and where we end up seeing serial victims. So quite often we'll sort of have a woman come through and she's just like, yep, no, I'm all good now, he's gone. And then like 6 months later she'll come through with a new bloke. And she's just like, I just don't know how I keep picking these men. And that's where Charmed and Dangerous is actually really great. It sort of breaks a lot of that down, but it's partially because they're very good at picking you.
Right.
And partially because you get this love bombing and you're just like, yes, like someone's treating me right. But it's like this over amount, it's not grammatically correct, of love and...
I get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like way over the top.
Yeah.
It's almost indicative of something.
Yeah, like what are you hiding, bro?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like speaking about emotions, I'm guessing your job is to sit there and listen to these stories, get it told day in and day out. And I mean, I know for me in a role like that, I would probably be in tears every day. Yeah. I don't think I could emotionally attach myself from the role. How do you deal with these stories that are coming through and regulate your own emotions and stay? I mean, do you detach yourself from these stories, or are you constantly in this state of empathy? Like, do you have a system that you kind of use to keep yourself in a good headspace?
It's different for everyone. It's For me, I think everybody gets a little bit desensitized, which sounds terrible, but like you said, it's kind of the only way that we can do our job. And, you know, when I see something on the news, often my mother will gasp and go, "Oh, that's horrible." And I'm just like, "Oh, it's a pretty terrible case." You know, you do get quite removed from it. But you really have to actively self-care. You've got to do the things that you know make you feel good. Jiu-jitsu is one of the biggest things for me. Massive endorphin release, keeps me fit and healthy. And when you're on the mat and you're about to be choked out or have your shoulder, broken, you can't think of anything else. So it helps you detach. So that's a big self-care thing for me. But you need to take your leave. You need to identify when you're burning out. You quite often your colleagues identify when you're burning out. They're just like, bro, you might need to take some time off. Like you're really just starting to not be the best social worker you could be. And you know, you just need to be able to debrief a lot, which is where COVID has actually been quite difficult for us, because quite often you'll have this really difficult call and you're just like, oh God, that was a lot. And you'll spin around in your chair and debrief with someone in the office.
Now there's no one there to
There's no one
let
there.
off some steam to.
I don't even have a cat.
Do you get counselling at all?
We do have access to EAP, which is Employee Assistance Program. And I will often check in with a really great therapist that I have, more like how we go to the dentist every 6 months or 12 months to get to clean and make sure we don't have cavities and all that sort of thing. I think it's really important, particularly for social workers and anyone in that mental health field, to get those mental health checkups and just check in and make sure that you're doing good.
Do you ever find yourself starting to develop like resentment towards males being in your gig?
Yeah. And quite often, like I have a wonderful, wonderful partner, but when I was dating, it was really difficult because it was sort of like if a guy that I was seeing sort of said one thing wrong, I'm just like, nah.
Jump on
That's
it.
Red flag.
Yeah, right.
I know you.
Yeah, I've seen you before. And that was something that, it was really important to have my non-social worker friends, because I tell my social worker friends, they're just like, nah, we'll see him next week in court. And sort of like run that past them, because, where you're talking about the red flags, firstly, you've got little red flags and big red flags, and I think that's quite important to differentiate, which is something that I probably didn't learn until recently.
Well, tell us what they are.
So, like, it can be difficult with little red flags because they can often look like normal dating things. So, if he's like a little bit cocky and a little bit cheeky, is he being a little bit cocky and a little bit cheeky, or is he like chauvinistic and a bit of a prick and, he's quite narcissistic? So they're sort of little red flags. Bigger red flags are sort of like when he's wanting to know where you are at all times, where he starts getting jealous really quickly of other guys, even if it's just in a joking fashion, sort of just like, oh, you're hanging out with him again. And he's like, bro, I've been seeing him for like 3 weeks and I've known this guy for years and we're really great mates. Can you just back off? That's a little bit of a bigger red flag. Mm-hmm. And then obviously you have the really big red flags where you see that, massive amount of control, where, things get quite physical quite quickly, where he starts to get really jealous and controlling. And it's easier to identify. When they're the little red flags, when it's just like, oh, like, you're texting me every morning and that's really lovely, and just like, hey, what are you doing today? And that's really, really nice. But is that going to progress to you text me every morning and then every hour after that and you want to know who I'm with and what I'm doing? So where is that going to go?
Yeah.
Is sort of what the little red flags look like. Like it could be fun, like it could be really lovely and normal, or it could be signs of someone who's really controlling. And I think the little red flags are good ones to just keep on the shelf and just keep an eye on. And you don't have to have a massive reaction to them. Definitely communicate about them and say, what's this all about? but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to cut things off straight away, but they're definitely worth keeping on the shelf.
Yeah, it's a really good point, is that you have to take those into account. But the tricky part is that some of those actions or behaviours are really nice.
Yeah.
And could be an indication that he's
really caring,
super into you and super caring, or could be an indication that, but you don't know until you've given it more time. Yeah.
And my partner is super caring and amazing. And it was in those early stages, it was my best friend who's not in social work who I was running things by, and she's just like, dude, that's totally normal. Calm down.
Yeah, right.
And I'll tell my social worker friends and they're just like, nah. They all love him now, it's fine. But yeah, it was my best friend who sort of just brought that level of perspective, because obviously we do have a really warped perspective sometimes, and it can be hard to exit that. Yeah, right. We know that we see the worst of the worst kind of men, but when you see them all day, every day, it can be really hard to regulate.
Not think that they're everywhere.
Yeah.
What about us as adults? And are there signs that we can pick up, maybe with colleagues or friends or family members, that we could be overlooking? And then if we do see those signs and they're, it's quite blatant, what kind of steps can we take? Because obviously just ignoring it is probably, I'm guessing, one of the worst things you can do.
Yeah.
You're accepting it as something that's allowable or tolerable. What can we do as individuals if we see some form of or signs of domestic violence of people that are close to us?
Well, this podcast is one thing that's absolutely amazing, is men having these conversations. So that's incredible. A campaign.
Why is it so hard for men to talk about this subject? Because it seems like an uncomfortable topic for a lot of men. I've had this conversation with men before, and usually it gets a little bit, I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Kind of the body language you get, no one actually says it. Crossed arms.
It's kind of the same response as talking about racism, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
I'm not racist.
Yeah, but it's kind of like, I find there's a real thing where it's like, or feminism, right? Talking about that, where it's just like, nah, like people just shut off to it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, there's a whingy kind of female thing that really irritates a lot of guys, and I feel like it's almost like a lot of guys don't want to look that deep.
Yeah.
And challenge beliefs and sort of patterns.
Yeah, and like I think first and foremost, it's this hail back to sort of 1970s second wave radical feminism that's like all men, and no one has said all men in like the last 30 years. So it's this idea that if we talk about this, it's like you're accusing me of being, I'm not a violent man, I'm a good man. And it's really threatening. And it's sort of like when you talk about men in general, because we know this is a gendered thing, it's like, well, I'm a man. And so you're saying that I would do that?
Yeah.
And it's your ego, right?
Yeah.
And so like I would never do that. And that makes it really difficult to have those conversations, because you sort of have to try and remove yourself and leave your ego at the door to be able to have those conversations, because it feels personal. In regards to sort of what you do when you sort of see something, it's having those conversations. And, when you hear someone make a sexist joke, it's not funny.
It's not cool.
And it's not just not laughing at it. It's just like, bro, that's not funny. And it's making that remark.
Showing that the culture, it's unacceptable.
Yeah, because that's where it sort of starts, right? Is this, it starts with jokes, and then it moves into this belief that men do get to have a bit of control and get to sort of choose women and do what they like with women, and it progresses from there. But if we sort of look back at the beginning, where they're getting that acceptance and they're getting the laughs and they're getting the camaraderie around these sexist attitudes, that's the starting point. And, I think most people have moved past jokes about, just whack a one. I think we have really moved quite far as society in terms of jokes about physical violence against women really aren't funny and are not accepted anymore. I may be in an echo chamber. Not sure.
No,
I
think
don't
you're
feel
right.
like it comes up much.
I remember just like being in primary school.
Yeah.
But racist jokes, sexist jokes were just, they were just the thing that
Normal.
everyone told. And most of them I didn't even understand, but they were the ones that were kind of rotating at the time.
Yeah.
I guess 'cause people hear the parents say it and then they say it at school. But I don't hear it as much anymore, if anything,
Yeah.
at all.
Which, you know, I suppose it was easier to identify. It's sort of what's made DV harder is that that's really easy, right? Someone's got a bruise. But particularly now when we have like technological abuse, that's made things wildly different and so difficult. So even just the jokes about just like, oh yeah, I've got her on find my phone. I'd like, you know, I'll know when she's here. You know, just those sorts of comments, and they may not even sound abusive, but you're sort of just like, oh God, you track her everywhere she goes.
I wanted to ask that, and I might have. Feel free to cut me off if I've diverted from another question because we've thrown a lot at you. But we have. This is something that I've noticed with this discussion and with the racism discussion is that within our culture and within our time, there are things that we say and things that we kind of subconsciously believe that are sexist or racist without knowing them, right? And then when someone brings it to the forefront is like, well, actually, when you make a joke about punching your wife and giving her a black eye, it's actually a sexist thing. And you're like, fuck yeah, it is. Like, just never thought about it.
Yeah.
Right? And you're like, thanks for alerting me to that. What are things, like you've touched on a bit already, but what are things that we do or say that kind of, that contribute to this culture?
I think it's sort of, a lot of it's really difficult to identify, and it's sort of like, this idea, it comes back to sort of normal gendered ideas of sex and dating, sort of like how men have women on a rotation, you know, those kinds of comments. Like, oh yeah, I saw this chick and then I went and did a booty call with this chick and then I went and slept at this chick's house. You know, it's sort of indicative of a lack of respect around women. And the way that men can often talk about sexual acts with women quite publicly without consent. You know, oh, I did this to her, I did that to her, and, you know, you're just like, does she know that you're sharing that?
Yeah.
So that they can be more difficult to identify because it's not necessarily with a malicious intent, but it is still that undercurrent of misogyny and of lack of respect of women when we start to discuss women that way, particularly when men discuss them, you know, in the locker room, this locker room talk, quote unquote. It's that it doesn't stay in the locker room. It filters into your psyche and it filters into your subconscious, and it's just like, oh, we can treat women like that. And, you know, I can go and manipulate this woman and tell her that I'm not seeing anybody else and I'm really hot on her to get in her pants. And then I end up going to another woman's house the next night. You know, it's those misogynistic behaviours and attitudes that then develop into a culture where women become property or become disposable. And then that's, you know, where we sort of see violence moving from, which is sort of really an interesting paradigm in the way that we're sort of looking at men being able to have multiple women and choose multiple women, but then also having ownership over them. Sort of, it's a really interesting juxtaposition. But that's sort of, I think, where that lack of respect of women lies is where we then see violence stemming from. Because you don't sort of hit someone you respect unless like you're in a cage, you know, MMA match kind of thing. But, you know, you get hit in a bar, it's because that guy doesn't respect you and it's just like, oh, look what I can do to you.
Yeah.
You know, you don't hit someone you respect. And so I think it really stems from that lack of respect of women, and it just sort of branches off in a number of areas, but it leads to violence against women.
You're speaking of echo chambers. What kind of, have you seen any changes since social media has become such a powerful kind of tool, and also these chat lines? And I'm guessing that it's been a good thing to connect people that are going through issues, but possibly also to connect perpetrators or people that feel a certain way about women. These core values we were talking about. and getting that kind of individual into an echo chamber could potentially be very, very dangerous as well.
Yeah.
Do you see any of that that kind of stuff popping up?
Yeah.
With your cases at all? Or?
And I think, we have a really scary far right wing in Australia, which I think a lot of people think is a lot weaker than it is. And we have things like Reddit, 4chan, men's rights activists, and it's this really scary echo chamber.
And trolling is a big part of that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it, particularly with even just Facebook and Instagram algorithms, it just keeps showing you more of what you want to see. And then you think that everybody's reality is that, and everybody is with you and agrees with you. And that can be sort of really dangerous in the way that you genuinely feel like you have a right to be doing these things and that you're supported in these things.
And potentially can find the support. So a woman could be in a position where they can be getting abuse from a number of males instead of just the one now. Yeah,
absolutely. And, we see things like on Reddit groups, it's like, download this app and, on your missus' phone, and it looks like, it's just looks like a flashlight app. But really it's a mirroring app, and it mirrors her whole phone to yours. So you know who she's texting. Oh, it's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying, dude. On that, if women ever think that they do have anything on their phone, if they have an Apple phone, they can go straight to the Mac shop and they will look. Doesn't matter if it's under warranty, anything. They have a policy that if someone comes in and says that they think their phone's been tracked or hacked, they'll look at it. So that's also a really interesting TED point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fuck, I don't even conceive,
so common,
that's
dude.
Bananas.
Yeah, so common. You've got these sort of groups that are just sharing abuse tactics and, apps and different ways of doing things and manipulation tactics. And it is really terrifying. Unfortunately, I think it's actually more prevalent than help that women are able to sort of seek online, except for sort of finding in-person services. I think COVID's probably changed a little bit of that in terms of there's a lot more online, but women are needing in-person help, whereas men can get tactics online. So I think technology in general has really supported abusive men more than it has victimised women.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is that when you said earlier, technological abuse? Is that what you called it?
Yeah, technological abuse.
Is that what you're talking about, that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's if you think about your phone and how much of your life's on your phone, and what you do on your phone. You do your banking, you do your business emails, you do your phone calls, you do your text messages. Everything is on your phone.
Yeah.
And if someone had access to that, they know your whole life.
Yeah.
And, sometimes we have women who are just he knew what I said to my lawyer. And you're just was it over the phone? She's yeah. You're just go to the Mac store.
Wow.
And those are really scary things, because when women are, and this is something that happened in the Simon Gattani case. I think it was 2014, I'm going to say. There's a man who threw his partner off a balcony and killed her. He had a mirroring app on her phone, and she was doing all the things. She was sending text messages to people, and she's I'm going to store a bag of clothes at your house, and I'm going to store some money at your house. She was doing all the things. And he knew he was 5 steps in front of her all the time, and she couldn't figure it out. It's because he had a mirroring app on a phone.
Jesus.
And that was...
Gosh, that's scary.
That's so scary.
And that was when she was leaving, and when he lost control, that he then killed her. But he knew she was planning, and he was 3 steps ahead of her every time. She kind of had no chance.
Tell me about this this merger of family court and general court potential that's coming up. I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems like a very precarious move from the government and almost a little bit scary. Am I over-exaggerating by thinking along those lines? Or?
Yeah, look, I don't know the in-depth details enough of what the proposed merger is. I do know that currently they are really separate. So
for a good reason, you know?
For good reasons. So the criminal court is a state court. The family court is a federal court. They are, if you're at one, you're often at the other. but they are two separate courts. I know there's a lot of arguments for and against any kind of merger. It does mean that women tell their story multiple times. There are different burdens of proof. There's different ways that stories are told and need to be told in each court. And then we have really practical problems with them being separate, like police cannot enforce family court orders. So, for example, this happens a lot. They've got family court orders, interim or final, it doesn't matter. He has the kids until 6 p.m. Sunday. He doesn't return them. She calls police. She's just like, he hasn't returned my kids. They can do a welfare check, so they can go out and make sure that the kid's okay. But if the kid's there going, oh yeah, I'm fine, I'm watching telly, they cannot take that child back to mum. Doesn't matter that that's what the family court orders say. Doesn't matter that she's worried out of her brain. That kid's fine. They don't have any jurisdiction over family court orders. And that it just gets sort of registered as a breach and goes back to the family court, and it's sort of like, well, he breached them. And it's, but that Sunday night, she doesn't get the kids back. It's just like recorded as another breach. So that's really problematic.
Who can enforce those?
No one.
Right. There's no policing force for that.
No.
Right.
It literally just goes back to the court as a breach, and if there's interim orders, it may factor into the hearing when a final order comes about, and all that sort of thing. But we're talking about a years-long process. We're not talking about that Sunday night.
Yeah.
And then the family court is also endlessly abusive to women. It is a very misogynistic and patriarchal structure. We have very strict gender roles that we see play out in family court. Like I was saying before, we see women who are just like, I'm really concerned about him having contact with my children because I really think that his mental health is declining. I'm really worried about him. But then they don't want to be seen as this vindictive woman in the family court. So either way they play it, they're going to get blamed in family court. We don't see that happen with men in family court. It's not the same rhetoric. We don't see this rhetoric about good mothers, bad mothers in the same way with good fathers, bad fathers.
Seems very old-fashioned, doesn't it? I'm guessing things take a long time to change.
Yeah.
Do you have any course of action if you believe that the magistrate is not giving the case what you think it needs?
Fit.
No.
Right. Or it is final.
Yeah, magistrates are pretty untouchable, which is really frustrating. You don't have cases recorded in local court like you do in district and Supreme Court. So there's a lot less recording of them, like publicly accessible recording. But there's actually just no... There is a body that you can sort of send a particular case to and you're just like, I don't think this was dealt with properly. It's not a process I've ever done, and it's a process that you need to be really careful about. I can't remember who the body is, but it's in justice, and it's not something that is ever really done because it needs to be, a magistrate has a huge spectrum that they can work on for sentencing, and they can sort of be anywhere in that spectrum. But we can sort of say, like, based on the normal sentencing, this was way too harsh or lenient. But they're still working in that spectrum. And as long as they're working in that spectrum, they're pretty untouchable.
Right.
But it's a big spectrum.
Would that knowledge and potentially women who have been sort of scarred in that process, I'm guessing that would prohibit them from going down the court or, at least, or even just going to the police? Yeah,
and that's sort of a really scary thing that we often see, is that women will come to court and then they'll say, I'm never doing that again and I'm never reporting again. And we see it a lot with Indigenous women, which, if we sort of go back to stats, where is it, 35 to 80 times more likely to experience domestic violence than white women. So when we're looking at regional areas, we're looking at like 80% time, 80 times more likely. And then they're 32 times more likely to be hospitalised by assaults than white women. So they are overwhelmingly more victimised than anybody else. But then we also have like colonial histories, mistrust of police, mistrust and misunderstanding of criminal justice systems. A lot of them might have DCJ involved in kids being taken away. Their grandma was part of the stolen generation, and then we've got this generational trauma. Like there's so much going on for them, and then they finally go, okay, I'm going to do it your way. I'm going to report to police. I'm going to go to court, and then he gets like a community corrections order, which is like a good behaviour bond, and like no conviction, so it doesn't even come up on a record. And she's like, well, what did I do that for?
And you've been put through the ringer.
She's been put through the ringer. She's been on the stand. She gets pressure back from her mob. That's another thing that we see with Indigenous women. They're just like, I've got all this pressure coming from my mob, and that's just like another pressure on these women. And
that man is potentially still in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And nothing's really happened to him.
And he's probably angry.
He's
been dragged through it too.
Yeah, and then he can often have support of other people in that kinship group who are just like, she shouldn't have gone to police.
Yeah.
Because there's still a lot of mistrust there. On the other hand, it can work out really well for women. I've got a few clients at the moment who are continuously reporting breaches of AVOs that they've gotten through court, and it's really working for them in the way that they're just like, I have an order that says he can't come within 100 metres of my house and he can't contact me. And then, she's seen his car sitting out the front, and then he's tried to call her and she's reported those breaches, and police have gone and arrested him. He's been charged, and that's worked really well for her because it scared him. He can't have a criminal history. He'll lose his job, all of these sorts of things. That's when it can be really, really effective.
Yeah.
And an AVO is essentially, it is a piece of paper. It is only as effective as women make them.
Right.
Yeah. And as he respects them. That's correct. If quite often we have women who are just like, oh, I've got the AVO and he's breached it, but like I don't know if I should report it. And it's just like, if you don't report it, he doesn't get in trouble for it. You've got to make use of that AVO, which can be really difficult, particularly when he's the father of your kids, he's the primary breadwinner. If he loses his job, you also lose the money for your kids. So that can be really, really difficult, but it does really work for a lot of women in the way that they're just like, it's just meant that he's left me alone. And, he's gone off and found something else to occupy his time, but I feel safer.
Do you see a lot of re-offenders?
Yeah.
Like I'm guessing if one man does it to one woman, you get rid of that guy, he's just going to go off and do it to another.
Yeah.
So what's in place to stop like this reoffending kind of circle? Is it do they get like a warning, or do you get locked up, or do you have to actually commit something really nasty to get punished enough to put you off doing it over and over again?
So in terms of serial perpetrators, yes, we have a lot of them. Quite often we'll see sort of new women's names pop up and you're just like, oh, I haven't seen you before. And then you go into the referral and you look at the offender and just like, but I've seen you.
Oh, wow.
And you're just like, yeah, like, I've seen you across 3 or 4 of my victims kind of thing. With those men, there is not much you can offer them unless they're willing to get help. So most men's behavioural change programs are voluntary, and you can drop out at any time and all this sort of thing. To get court-ordered programs and all that sort of thing is really quite rare. There is a court program called Reinvest, which is like, to do with men's behavioural change, that you can elect to do voluntarily if you're up against certain charges. I think you also have to have a criminal history. And your court matter will be adjourned until Reinvest come back with like a report about how you're doing, and it's looking at this psychosocial education about your behaviour, and then that can lead to a lesser sentence for an assault, for example. But we have an incredibly reactive criminal justice system. Somebody has to do something before we can do something. And that's really frustrating. But when we look at it the other way, we can't, we start looking at things that are quite dystopian. So how do we charge someone for something they haven't done? How do we punish someone for something they haven't done?
Yeah.
How do we...
Kind of goes against the legal sort of perspective a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when we start traipsing into that, where does that stop? And the other thing that we need to think about, and we think about frequently, is anything that we put in place for men can also backfire on female victims, and quite frequently does, because our criminal justice system is terrible at identifying primary perpetrators and primary victims. So quite often we see a woman lashing back, because you think about it, you're in this abusive relationship, you don't just sit there. Quite often,
sooner or later you're going to fight back.
Yeah. And quite often we see these women with drug and alcohol problems, with mental health problems, and then they've slapped back or whatever's happened, and then they end up a defendant in the criminal justice system. And that's where a lot of our advocacy with police stems from, is because we're just I get that she scratched him, but he strangled her last week. So can we kind of talk about what this looks like?
It's still considered the same offence. Yeah.
Those two are two different crimes. We do have strangulation offences, which were recently changed, maybe a year ago or so. And they're being used a lot more, which is great, because when a woman is strangled, she's then 6 times more likely to be killed by her partner. So strangulation is kind of a gateway offence to murder.
She's more than 6 times more likely to be killed.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So if a woman comes to us and reports being strangled, she's at a much higher risk.
That's a big red flag.
A big red flag. Yeah. They're the big ones.
And how could something like that only be recognised a year ago? It seems like things are in the court of law, things are moving very slowly.
Glacial pace.
Whoa.
It was an offence before that, but it was just almost unprovable. It's you had to prove that she blacked out. How do you prove that you blacked out? You blacked out. And she's she's got to testify that she blacked out. But, we see it in jiu-jitsu all the time. People are out for 30 seconds and they jump up and they don't even realise they've been out.
Yeah.
When they've been chucked out on the mat. So how does she then say, oh, yeah, I was out for 15 seconds? What, are you recording it?
Yeah.
You got a stopwatch? She has no idea. So that was amended so that the strangulation offence didn't have to have her blacking out. But, yeah, it was pretty rarely able to be proven before that. But, yeah, I think it was only about a year ago that was changed. And we've known for a very long time that is sort of a gateway offence to murder. It's really, really concerning. But yeah, so we sort of see women who are oh yeah, I've been strangled 6 times, but I scratched him and now I'm a defendant in an ABH criminal charge. And, he's got an AVO protecting him, which then means that he uses that AVO. And he's just well, if you don't, do this, then I'm going to report you for, not complying with your AVO. And then that gives him more power. It's a really terrifying cycle.
Oh, that's an uphill battle, that one.
Jesus. Bridget, what you've mentioned a couple of resources already. Charmed and Dangerous is one. Where can people go? What can they do?
Yeah.
Whether obviously if they're experiencing something, but even if they're seeing something, because I've seen things with friends in the past. And you're something's going on there. And it's always that thing no, it's okay. I just happens sometimes, or, I had too many drinks, or he gets like that, or whatever it is. Where can people go?
Yeah. So there's a lot of help out there, and there are a lot of people waiting to help, which is amazing. The first port of call can often be DV line. And they are 24/7. And they can even just get you kick-started on where you go and what you can do. So their number, did you want numbers?
Nah, just I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Awesome. For just someone to talk to. And quite often you just need someone to talk through it, and then sort of come to the idea that, no, this actually isn't right. And then you can move forward to trying to do something about it. So Lifeline and rape and DV services are really great for that as well. And then my organisation, WDVCAS, we are statewide, and we have a number that you can call and directs you to your local WDVCAS. And that's where we can really start to do the practical stuff and like, what do you need? Let me help you do that. And even if it is just, I need someone to talk to, we can help with that too. But if it's like, I need help with housing, I need help with child, care, I need this, that and the other, we can refer to local services that do that. There's like safe beds for pets with RSPCA, which is another reason that a lot of women don't leave, particularly if they like don't have kids. It's like they're kids, they're fur baby. And you can't take them into most refuges or, apartments or whatever. So they stay for their pet. So there's those kinds of programs. And then there's family law advice is probably the next biggest one. So you've got the legal aid domestic violence unit, and then you've got your local community legal centre. And then you can always call your local police domestic violence liaison officers. So within each police local area command, you have a domestic violence team, and their job is DV, day in, day out. They get it. It's all they do. They go to court every single week. They come to our safety action meetings. They are there every day.
Wow.
And they are always happy to have a chat. And a lot of women are just like, I want help with this, but I don't want to tell you everything because I don't want him charged. And I think it is really important for women to know that when they do report something to police, it is quite often then out of their hands.
Right. The police can then go ahead and
police
prosecute.
can charge and put an AVO on there and don't need her consent whatsoever, which can be really handy in the way that if they then get pressure to, I need you to drop the charge, it's a very American term, she can say, I can't. Police put the charges on you. Police put the AVO out. I can't drop it. And then that relieves the pressure from them. So it can be really beneficial for them. But for women who are just like, I actually really don't want him charged, I think it's really beneficial for them to be aware that police can do that without their consent. But, when you have a chat to the DVLOs, they can sort of make you aware of sort of all this sort of thing and what that all looks like and what your alternatives might be.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I think that's a real big one, isn't it? That like being able to talk to someone, get in touch, but then also knowing that it's not going to result in action being taken necessarily.
Yeah. And that's where I think the WDVCASs have a really great sort of thumb in each pie, is that because we're situated within the court system and with police, we have a lot of that information and we're able to really tell you what it's going to look like and what the next 2 weeks to a year with these court proceedings might look like, but then also do that social aspect as well, which is what I really love about my job, is I get to do the whole thing. And I get to sort of really give, and it's that fear of the unknown, right? Like it's awful. So give women sort of a little bit of an understanding of what things might look like from here on out.
Yeah, well, I hope that what we went through today just got some people thinking about, that, because I know for me, I learned a bunch of stuff over the last 90 minutes. And I think there's a lot of parts, like what you've highlighted, is that there's a lot of parts to domestic violence that we wouldn't consider as precursors or components of it.
Yeah.
And when you bring them up, you're like, oh shit, yeah, okay, those things kind of are, and those things are prevalent.
Yeah, very.
So it's kind of important and timely to get folks thinking about that stuff.
And talking about them.
Yeah.
Conversation. Like getting this conversation out on the table, getting politicians to talk about it, the police to talk about it, and feeling comfortable about having those conversations in your workplace, in your family, in your own home,
Yeah, and it's really difficult to have those conversations sometimes, but it's what perpetuates DV, is that it stays hidden. And politicians hate talking about it because it's so difficult. As I said, one punch, so easy.
Yeah.
DV so hard.
Yeah.
So it is sort of like, if we can make it normal to talk about DV, then it might carry some less shame for women to talk about. They may feel like they can come forward without feeling like a failure. And we might sort of start getting somewhere. That's the hope.
Well, thanks for being on the front line.
Yeah, Bridget,
Thank you.
it makes me feel good knowing that there's a nice, strong, empowered woman looking after our girls out there. It's great.
Thank you, T. Yeah, thank you very much for talking about it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's cool. Pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Do you have anything you want to plug? Do you have anywhere? Do you want people to contact you? Are you looking for Instagram followers? Because we've got gazillions.
Yeah, oh God, I don't even know my Insta. I will let you know what my Insta is. But yeah, if anybody's needing any kind of help, really happy to help out. I think it's my full name, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. We'll put a link to it in the show notes anyhow.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's just if anyone's just needing a little bit of a direction, always happy to help.
It is your full name, at Bridget Mottram. That's Mottram.
It's very technology safe of me, isn't it? And just honestly, just our legal centre, Southwest Sydney Legal Centre, they are incredible. I was saying to you, Joe, is that a lot of we have to sort of get approval to do all this sort of things, and a lot of CEOs wouldn't be stoked with their staff just going and randomly talking on a podcast
at some gym.
At some rando gym. But our CEO is amazing in that respect, and all of our lawyers are very very knowledgeable and great TV services, great expertise, and it can be really great talking to a lawyer. Again, police often don't have a lot of control over what they can do. They have to take action, but a lawyer can give you sort of a little bit of a legal understanding about what it looks like. And, there's local community legal centres everywhere, so it's definitely a resource that I think is pretty underutilised, and ours is pretty amazing.
That's cool. Well, thank you again for coming on.
Thank you.
We appreciate your work.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening, guys. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Found it informative. If you did find it informative for you and helpful, and you think that you know someone who might also benefit from listening to it, please share it with them. Send them a link to the episode, or post it on Instagram or whatever. But helps to support our show, but also helps to get this message out there and get people having these conversations, which really is the most important thing about this. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, listeners. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.